Hi, I want to make a video on practical functionability and how that's our only expectation of any kind of default sense of satisfaction or contentment or complacency that we can experience when we're experiencing anything. And when we're trying to gratify our desires, we're gratifying something based on a deprivation. And I mentioned this in a previous video, and I just want to make its own video just to make sure I can describe it a little more, maybe from a different perspective, a little more thoroughly. And it goes back to this idea of you can only have so much of an expectation. You can only have so much of an expectation when describing a specific circumstance, and not describing, but any kind of experience in life. You can only have so much of a certain expectation. And it's mostly about letting the perfect get in the way, or your great expectation get in the way of the good. I don't want to make any mistakes. I want to do my best. You make one mistake, you think about that, and when you're actually doing the thing that you're trying to do your best at, and then your expectation, you start contemplating the expectation that you have of doing so well, and then just because you were thinking and you're distracted too much by that thought, you end up not doing as good, and then that gets in the way and your expectation is shattered, and therefore that in and of itself creates a deprivation that you're experiencing. You're experiencing a deprivation. You create an expectation only to create a greater deprivation. So in a way, it's almost better to be surprised with no or with little expectation and let that expectation create itself by existing outside of itself, other than a thought that you have or a conceived notion that you have based on an expectation. Because those expectations are obviously usually to the best, and it's about controlling your expectations and controlling what you expect within a reasonable realm, so that you know and recognize practically what's the best certainty that I can have to a certain, what I can expect most out of a certain outcome, and always leaving your expectations a little begging, so that you can always satisfy them to a certain extent and say, well, I want at least this, sort of like hope for the best, expect the worst kind of mentality that you can have. And just, dealing with situations in life, you can hope for the best, but you can expect the worst. Sort of like when you're experiencing some kind of expectation, you can apply the same kind of thing. Hope for the best, but expect the worst. Create some kind of um, discrepancy between what you hope and what you expect. I hope things go well, but don't make that your expectation. Hope things can go well, but create a distinction between that and your expectation. I hope things go well, but I'm going to expect them not to go well. And since I'm still right here, sort of like thinking about, I have to do all these different things, thinking about every single thing that you have on a list, and I'm right at the beginning. That can be very discouraging, and sometimes you don't even want to finish what you haven't even started, or you've barely started. But when you think about it one step at a time, and you don't let the expectation of some kind of greatness of what your expectation is, of the outcome of what you expect, whatever the thing that you're doing or what you just started doing, don't let that get in the way, and just think about each and individual step. Don't think about how many pages you have to read in the book. Just try your best to enjoy the page that you're on right now, and think about it one page at a time, and not 500 pages from now and 500 pages from now in 5 minutes, because it's not going to happen. I can just skip and skim through the book. No, you got to read the whole book, because you have a couple of tests and you have a quiz on every chapter, and that's what you have to do based on the circumstances. You're going to have to create some kind of you're going to have some kind of you're going to have to accomplish something. You're going to have to do something a certain way to at least have some expectation, and that almost helps you with your other expectations that you have. You have to go through this expectation, but it helps you with your other expectation. I have to read the book, but the expectation out of that is I'll do good on the quiz, or whatever it is for this chapter, or whatever it is for the book test that you have in the end, or something. The book report you have to write. Something you feel like you'll get in the end. And it's about, I guess, feeding you a carrot, giving you something to look forward to, and then that can drive you and help distract you towards the end, and help you look past all the process and look towards the end in a positive light, and just ignore the process even though you're going through the process, and look towards something. But then again, you can always go too high and expect that thing to be so great, and it's about controlling those expectations, whatever the expectation may be, regardless of whatever um, thing may be a changeable factor, a malleable variable that you can include in that circumstance. The expectation is the thing that you need to worry about. And the expectation is something you need to find yourself in an ability to control the expectation that you may have, and to a certain circumstance. Because another point I want to make is that your practical functionability and your contentment with existing is something that is the thing that we're reaching, is we're reaching some kind of contentment with existence. And that's all we're trying to do, is let our practical functionability be as best and the best functioning features that it can be, have our gratifications be as satisfied as we know they can be, and then going from there and having those expectations and make sure those expectations don't get the best of us, and realizing that it's about reaching the dead end when it comes to satisfying your desires. And satisfying your desires is satisfying the deprivations that you have, and that's all we can do. The only practical satisfaction that we can have is satisfying these um, practical functions that we have, and satisfying our psychological and physical well-being, and satisfying those desires, and taking away whatever pain or suffering we may have, and doing that to the best we can. And once we reach that, we're right on back to searching for some other deprivation. So we can only do much to mitigate against these problems that we have, but it's about mitigating against these problems the most efficiently and making sure we can get as close as we can. And that's about us getting as close as we can and staying there for as long as we can. But in the end, it's about avoiding the negative and not achieving the positive. And we're trying to avoid the negative, and that's how that's the mechanism by which this life game works, is avoiding the negative. And like life, like death, it's all about avoiding the negative and not experiencing the negative. It's not about the positive. So when you die, it's about avoiding the negative, and when you live, it's about avoiding the negative. So the function works either way, living or dead. Even though you're not experiencing a positive, when you're dead, you're not experiencing a negative. So it's all good is good. So therefore, death is good. And when you're living, all you can experience and all that really means anything is avoiding deprivation and negatives. And you can't experiencing negatives. So life is bad there because you can experience negatives. So life is bad because you can experience, since you can experience negatives in life, therefore life is bad, and death is good because there's no, see, the thing is, and death is good because you can't experience any bad. And there's no good, but you can't experience any bad, therefore it is good. So death is good because there is no bad, and life is bad because there's good, but there's no real good. There's no zero sum that we're reaching, and it's all bad. And that's what makes it make sense, because it doesn't matter that we're not being satisfied when we're dead. It just matters that we're avoiding the negative, and that's what matters in life too. But the thing is, we're always fighting against that negative. And that's the only thing that exists in this reality, is fighting against any kind of reasonable expectation or any kind of anticipation we may have. And that in and of itself can create a negative, because the anticipation is based on a negative. Pride and ego, things like that, are based on negative circumstances that we're trying to compensate for, or we have an expectation for. And we're filling some kind of gap, either psychologically, egotistically, whatever it may be, physically, all psychologically speaking, because we're experiencing this game through our psychology. But life is bad. Life is a deprivation, therefore it is bad. And death, non-existence, is good because there's no deprivation. And it doesn't matter once you die, because you're not experiencing anything. Even though you're not experiencing any satisfaction, you're not experiencing any negative. But in life, you're experiencing negatives and satisfaction. But when you're dead, you don't need to experience any satisfaction. And there's only negative to be satisfied in life. Therefore, life is bad. And when you're dead, you don't need to be satisfied. Life is bad, and death is good. Even if you enjoy life, it doesn't matter. You need to exist before you can enjoy life. And to enjoy life, you need negatives. And even if you're either ignoring it, you know better, and you're ignoring it, or you're ignorant. You don't know. You're just not thinking at life in the right way, because you just haven't seen just how bad you have it, because you're stuck in the circumstances. You haven't had it so good to recognize the discrepancy and the distinction between good and bad. You haven't had that distinction enough. Therefore, you're not going to recognize just how bad things can get and just how good things can get. How close to the zero sum you can reach, and how close to as far away as you can get from that zero sum you can reach. And it's about recognizing that distinction. And the thing is even if you can reach really close to the zero sum in life, it's all about the only time you can really experience it is when there's no context to existence. Therefore, your existence is null and void. You are dead, and that's when you reach the zero sum. Or when you say you're sleeping. Dreamless sleep. You can suffer during a dream. Dreamless sleep, though, you're experiencing some form, like a computer being off as opposed to broken, the CPU being broken, or whatever it may be. The distinction is the CPU being broken. Any piece in a computer can break it, making it unfunctionable. But while our brain functions as our memory and our sentience, so any piece that's not part of this machine that's not working will break us. Um, but see, the thing is all these things are in our brain, our memory. You shoot the brain, it destroys the memory, it destroys every piece of us that we can't function anymore as a biological machine. While any piece in the computer can destroy it, while a piece of us can obviously stay even if a piece is missing. So a computer becomes unfunctionable, but it's a good enough analogy or a metaphor to make an example out of in describing the situations of life in the game. So we can only have so much of an expectation for our existence. We can only do so much to change the circumstances of our reality. We can only do so much to have an expectation for something better, because we can't change the nature of reality. We can only work within its limits, and work within its limits to a certain degree based on our knowledge level or things like technology, and even then we can't change the practical functionability of the existence that we're living in. We're living in, I mean, like I've said before, you can't change the bedrock, you can only change the foundation from which that on top of the bedrock. You can only change the pieces, like on Tetris. You can't change the Tetris square that things are falling down into. You can only change, and the rocks, once they've been laid, they can't change, and you can only build off those rocks. You can only change it so much, and once things have happened, those are the Tetris blocks falling into place. You can't change the foundation, which is a square, and once these blocks have happened, that's time passing or movement happening, and since, I mean, even if it doesn't mean anything now, it led to something in the future. The Tetris blocks is a good example, a good analogy, because once the pieces have fallen, they create a foundation that can't be eliminated. And once they, just speaking based on the rules of the game, you can only build off those things. And you can even the playing field again, because the thing is you can still make it even. You've gone from the bottom of the thing, the square, to the top, and you can even it out again. It could still be a flat line again. You can find a way to do that, metaphorically speaking. And making things, say, hypothetically the same way they were, or based on a state of mind. You can still flatten the playing field again. You can flatten it based on that characteristic, but it's still different from the bottom, and it's near the top now. Even if it's flat, the bricks have layered in there at the top, near the top now, as opposed to the flatness of the bottom of the square, the Tetris square, or the Tetris rectangle. So that's a good way of describing it. Even if you level it out, it's a different place, and it's based on a different foundation, and things have still happened, even if you found a way to mitigate against those things and make it seem like nothing has changed. You can flatten it again, or metaphorically flatten it as much as you can, but it doesn't mean that it isn't a different place, and these previous bricks haven't happened. It's flat, but the previous bricks still make up its foundation based on the beginning. So it still means something. So, you know, based on our default state sensibilities, we don't necessarily know how good it is and how bad we have it until we've seen the worst and seen the best, at least from our point of view, having a very strong sense of bad and good and the distinction. Even then, sometimes the revelation of recognizing this can either be denied, and that can be a roadblock, and you can use arguments against that. You can use arguments and deny it, and arguments, which is detrimental. Even if you know the truth, letting your fantasy get in the way and not recognizing you could still argue the truth and live in a fantasy, is a distinction I don't see how other people can't see. You can argue the truth and still live in your fantasy. You can deny everything being true in your fantasy. But apparently people can't make that distinction. They have to live in their fantasy and argue their fantasy is the truth. And they must get off on it sexually in an argument. There must be something, some kind of argumentative tactic that people have. They recognize it and they say something completely different. Oh, I agree with you. Then they say something completely contrary to what you believe or what you just said. So it's obviously there's some kind of discrepancy going on, some kind of cognitive dissonance, or some kind of weird sexual gratification on getting off in an argument. Something's happening. Yeah, anyway. So, yeah, we can only do so much to change the practical reality that we're living in, and we can't change the foundation, and we can only change so much in the circumstances of our reality, and our expectations can only go one place, a zero sum, and they can't even reach that in this reality. And the only time they can be reached is when there's no context to be reached. There's no goal to be reached. There's just non-existence, and that's the only real goal to reach in the end, is reaching the zero sum. But that goal was only created because you didn't have to exist to begin with. And you're not going to have any context of that accomplishment because death is non-existence, is non-awareness, is non-sentience, consciousness. You're not experiencing anything. So the end that you reach, the final accomplishment that means something, is something that you have no context of because you're dead. You don't have any awareness. So you're kind of defeats the point of it. But then again, if it went on, what would create the point of anything you're doing? It would give no context to a situation just based on your living. There's no death, then obviously there would be no context in a different circumstance. Because the very thing that lends itself to some kind of any meaning is death, that gives it some kind of context within a boundary that leads to some kind of end that means something other than perpetually doing the same redundant process over and over and over again. And that's all we'd be doing if we were stuck in the same process and found a way to become invincible and vulnerable to anything and living forever. And it wouldn't lead anywhere but the same old redundant processes over and over and over again. So we'd be stuck in the process of doing the same thing and following the same rudimentary, redundant processes that life has lended us to, and there'd be nothing else other than satisfying, because that's the only thing there is satisfying a desire. That's the only motivating mechanism to make a living, sentient thing have any functional purpose and not go insane and not experiencing any pain, or is mitigating against the pain as much as possible. And we need the pain to get the gain in many circumstances, because that's the thing that gives context to our existence. Otherwise, we wouldn't be living, and that's the way the living game works. So we can't do anything about the game and the way it works. And the expectation, the only real high expectation we can have is, I can't wait until I feed my stomach again. I can't wait until I satisfy whatever sexual satisfaction. I can't wait until I do this, do that. And if things are greater than you expected, it's because you didn't realize how bad it was before you saw the green of grass was on the other side. So you're only creating a different expectation, a greater expectation for what you want to reach to the height. And then once you reach that new high, you're getting closer and closer to reaching whatever high peak you may reach, and it creates whatever used to be satisfying to you. The things that used to be so satisfying will not be as satisfying. So your expectations for satisfaction, once you've reached and seen the greener grass on the other side, will become greater, and the things that used to be as satisfying for you will not be quite as satisfying anymore, because there's a different context to the situation. Even if you didn't know, it still has a difference on the satisfaction that you experience, because it creates a different context, because you know how much better it can be once you've satisfied or found a way to experience more satisfaction or contentment in the end. So then again, you're just creating a different deprivation once you satisfy something greater than your expectation. So you're digging yourself a hole no matter what, and once you finally reach the goal, there's no context to your goal. So it's a defeat. It's a lose-lose game, regardless of what you think. And even if you think you're winning, even if you think life is worth living, doesn't mean that if you didn't exist to begin with, you'd be hoping for existence, because you have to exist to hope for existence. And during life, the only thing you could do other than living is dying. And the only thing you can do when you're living is hoping for death, or living forever. and living forever and hoping for that, knowing it's not true, is only creating a deprivation for you. And even if you could live forever, it wouldn't be doing anything. And you'd realize it'd be almost more than an opportunity for you to feel some kind of deprivation, at least insanity, and recognizing that the only thing that you can experience is deprivation. Yeah, so I think that's all I wanted to say and describe. So I think that's all I need to say. I don't want to go on anymore, making these videos too long. So thank you, and if I need to mention anything else on this subject, I'll mention it in another video. So thank you, and until next time, bye.